with a worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder and discharge papers in his pocket. Marcus Cole stood in front of a crumbling gas station on Highway 52, trying to convince himself this wasn't the worst day of his life. The lawyer's call had come 3 weeks ago, informing him that his uncle Raymond, a man he barely remembered from childhood visits, had left him the Cole's Corner gas station in his will. Marcus had expected maybe a small inheritance, something to tide him over while he figured out what came next after 8 years in the Army. What he got instead was a derelict building with boarded windows, rusted pumps, and a property tax bill that made his stomach turn. What he didn't expect, buried beneath 40 feet of concrete and forgotten fuel tanks, was evidence of a crime that would connect him to the deadliest organized crime operation of the 1940s. A fortune that had vanished without a trace, and secrets that certain families had killed to protect for nearly 80 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Marcus walked the perimeter of the property, his combat boots crunching on broken glass and scattered gravel. Cole's Corner sat at a lonely intersection where Highway 52 met Old Ridge Road, about 30 miles outside the town of Ashford. The main building was a single-story structure with faded blue paint and a sagging roof. 2 ancient gas pumps stood like sentinels out front, their glass faces shattered, their hoses long since dried and cracked. Behind the main building, a smaller structure that might have been a service bay leaned dangerously to one side. The whole place looked like it had been abandoned for decades, not the 10 years the lawyer had mentioned. Marcus pushed open the front door, which hung awkwardly on broken hinges. The interior was surprisingly intact, just buried under years of dust and decay. A long counter ran along one wall, its surface covered with faded lottery tickets and ancient candy bar wrappers. Metal shelves lined the other walls, mostly empty except for a few rusted cans and moldering boxes. The cash register still sat on the counter, an antique mechanical model that probably hadn't worked since before Marcus was born. Behind the counter, a doorway led to what appeared to be a small office. This was supposed to be his fresh start. After 2 tours in Afghanistan and years of following orders, Marcus had imagined coming home to build something of his own. The Army had taught him discipline, mechanics, logistics, but it hadn't prepared him for the crushing reality of civilian life. No job prospects for a grunt with a high school diploma. No family to speak of, his parents gone years ago. Just him, his service record, and now this rotting monument to better times. The office was cramped and dark, with a small desk pushed against one wall and filing cabinets lining the others. Marcus pulled open drawers, finding yellowed receipts, maintenance logs, and business correspondence dating back to the 70s. His uncle Raymond had apparently been meticulous about records, even as the business slowly died. One drawer was locked, its handle refusing to budge when Marcus tested it. He made a mental note to find the key later. Outside, Marcus surveyed the fuel tanks with a practiced eye. 4 large underground tanks, their fill ports capped and covered with decades of grime. The pumps that once served them were beyond salvage, but the tanks themselves might still be intact. Might even have residual fuel that would need proper disposal before he could do anything with the property. The thought of environmental cleanup costs made his jaw tighten. He had exactly $2,000 in his bank account, the remainder of his final Army paycheck after paying for a bus ticket and a week in a cheap motel. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Marcus turned to see a late-model sedan pulling into the lot, pristine and expensive, completely out of place in the desolate setting. A man in his 50s emerged, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. He approached with the practiced smile of someone used to getting what he wanted. "Marcus Cole, I presume." The man extended a hand. "Richard Castellano. I represent certain business interests in the area. Welcome to Ashford." Marcus shook the offered hand, noting the expensive watch and manicured nails. Business interests. What kind of business interests would care about a dead gas station in the middle of nowhere? Castellano glanced around the property with barely concealed distaste. I heard Raymond passed. Shame. He was a fixture around here for years. I wanted to reach out about purchasing this property from you. Save you the headache of dealing with it. I just inherited it, Marcus said carefully. Haven't even decided what I'm doing with it yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Of course. Castellano's smile never wavered. But let's be realistic. This place is a money pit. The tanks probably need replacing. Environmental assessment alone would cost you tens of thousands. The building is condemned for all practical purposes. I can take it off your hands, give you enough to start fresh somewhere else. Say 75,000 cash. Marcus had no idea what the property was worth, but the eagerness in Castellano's voice triggered every warning instinct his military training had honed. When someone you don't know offers you money before you've even asked, they usually want something worth far more than they're offering. That's generous, Marcus said neutrally. But like I said, I need time to think about it. Something flickered behind Castellano's polished exterior, a flash of irritation quickly masked. Of course, take your time. He produced a business card from his jacket pocket. But not too much time. Property like this, sitting vacant, attracts the wrong kind of attention. Vandals, squatters. Would be a shame if something happened to it before you had a chance to make a smart decision. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus took the card, his expression giving nothing away. I'll keep that in mind. After Castellano left, Marcus stood in the empty lot, turning the business card over in his hands. The logo showed a development company, Castellano Properties, LLC. A quick search on his phone revealed a portfolio of commercial real estate, strip malls, convenience stores, gas stations. All seemingly legitimate. So why did every instinct tell him there was more to the story? The sun was setting by the time Marcus made his way back to the office. The locked drawer bothered him. He'd learned in the army that locked doors usually meant something worth protecting. Using a screwdriver he'd found in the service bay, he pried at the lock until it gave way with a satisfying crack. Inside were more papers, but different from the mundane business records elsewhere. These were older, some dating back to the 1940s, property deeds, transfer documents, and a leather-bound journal with his Uncle Raymond's name embossed on the cover. Marcus opened it carefully, the brittle pages crackling under his fingers. The earliest entries were simple enough: daily operations of the gas station, customer counts, supply orders. But as Marcus flipped forward, the tone changed. His uncle had started investigating something, making notes about the property's history, about previous owners, about rumors and local legends. One entry from 15 years ago caught Marcus's attention. Old Bill Hendricks finally talked after I bought him enough whiskey. Said his father worked here in the 40s when it was owned by the Moretti family. Confirmed what I suspected. This place was never just a gas station. It was a front. Money laundering, stolen goods, maybe worse. Bill said his father saw things, men arriving late at night, trucks being unloaded in the service bay. Then one night in 1947, everything changed. Federal raid, gunfire, bodies. The Morettis disappeared. Property seized and sold at auction. But Bill's father always swore something was left behind, hidden where the feds never looked. Marcus sat back, his mind racing. The Moretti family. Even he knew that name from history books and old crime documentaries. One of the most powerful organized crime families on the East Coast during the Prohibition era and beyond. They'd been involved in everything from bootlegging to gambling to murder for hire. The family had been dismantled by federal prosecutors in the late 40s. their leaders imprisoned or killed, their empire scattered. He flipped through more entries, finding his uncle's increasingly detailed research. Raymond had become obsessed with the property's history, convinced that the Morettis had hidden something valuable before their downfall. He'd spent years investigating, interviewing old-timers who remembered the raid, tracking down property records and police reports. The final entry, dated just weeks before Raymond's death, was brief but striking. "I know where to look now. The tanks. It was always the tanks. Going to hire someone to do ground-penetrating radar next month. If I'm right, everything changes." But Raymond had died suddenly of a heart attack before he could follow through. And now the property, with all its secrets, belonged to Marcus. The implications were staggering. If there really was something hidden beneath the gas station, something the Morettis had left behind nearly 80 years ago, it would explain Castellano's eagerness to buy the property. It would explain why a derelict gas station on a lonely highway suddenly had interested buyers before. Marcus had even unpacked his bags. Marcus spent the rest of the evening reading through every document in the locked drawer, piecing together his uncle's research. Raymond had been thorough, collecting newspaper clippings about the 1947 raid, court documents from the Moretti prosecutions, even architectural drawings of the original gas station layout. One set of drawings caught Marcus's attention. They showed the underground fuel tank installation from 1946, but with an unusual notation. Tank 4, it read, depth 42 feet, reinforced construction, sealed access point secondary chamber. Standard fuel tanks didn't go 42 feet deep. Standard fuel tanks didn't have secondary chambers. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as the pieces fell into place. The Morettis hadn't just run a front operation here. They'd built a vault, hidden beneath the legitimate fuel storage, accessible through some hidden mechanism that had survived decades of abandonment. The question was, what had they put in it? Money seemed obvious, but organized crime families didn't go to such elaborate lengths just to hide cash. There would be records too, evidence of their operations, names of corrupt officials and business partners, information that could still be damaging to powerful families decades later. Information worth killing to keep buried. Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to sell. He was going to find out what was hidden beneath Cole's corner, and he was going to do it before Castellano or anyone else could stop him. It was reckless, possibly dangerous, but for the first time since leaving the army, Marcus felt something he'd been missing for months: purpose, a mission. Something worth fighting for that wasn't just survival. He spent the night in the office, unwilling to leave the property unguarded. His military training had taught him to sleep light, and every sound outside made him alert, ready for trouble. Around midnight, a vehicle passed slowly on the highway, slowing as it approached the gas station before continuing on. Marcus watched from a darkened window, noting the late model SUV, the way it seemed to be surveying the property. Castellano's people, probably, checking to see if he'd taken the buyout offer seriously. Morning brought clarity and a plan. Marcus needed equipment, expertise, and most importantly, he needed to know exactly what he was dealing with before he started digging. The property had electricity, thankfully, connected by the lawyer to keep the estate from falling into total disrepair. Marcus set up his laptop, using his phone as a hotspot to search for information about ground-penetrating radar services, underground scanning, anything that could help him map what lay beneath the fuel tanks without actually breaking ground. The search led him to a small engineering firm 2 towns over, specializing in environmental assessments and underground utilities mapping. Marcus called, explaining that he needed a survey of underground fuel tanks at an old gas station property. The technician he spoke with seemed professional and incurious, exactly what he needed. They scheduled a visit for the following afternoon. With that arranged, Marcus turned his attention to the fuel tanks themselves. The caps were rusted solid, but with enough penetrating oil and a heavy wrench, he managed to loosen them. The smell that wafted up was surprisingly mild, not the overwhelming petroleum stench he'd expected. Shining a flashlight down into the first tank, he saw it was nearly empty, just a few inches of sludge at the bottom. The second and third tanks were the same. But the fourth tank, the one marked in the architectural drawings as having reinforced construction and a secondary chamber, was different. The access cap was heavier, more solidly constructed than the others. When Marcus finally got it open and looked inside, he found not the expected tank interior, but a narrower shaft, almost like a well, descending into darkness beyond the reach of his flashlight. The walls were lined with metal, not the usual steel of a fuel tank, but something heavier, reinforced. This wasn't designed to hold gasoline. This was designed to hold secrets. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he lowered a weighted line into the shaft, feeling it descend foot after foot before finally hitting bottom at what he estimated was about 40 feet. Exactly matching the architectural drawings. There was definitely something down there, a chamber of some kind, sealed and waiting for nearly 80 years. The sound of an approaching vehicle made Marcus quickly close the access cap and wipe his hands on his jeans. A battered pickup truck pulled into the lot, and an older man in work clothes climbed out, eyeing Marcus with open curiosity. "Help you," the man called out, his voice carrying the flat accent of someone who'd lived in rural areas his entire life. "Just checking out my property," Marcus replied, keeping his tone friendly but cautious. "I inherited it from my uncle Raymond Cole." The man's weathered face softened slightly. "Raymond was a good man. Name's Jack Mitchell. I own the auto shop about 5 miles down the road. Used to do some work for Raymond before he passed." He approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "Heard someone new took over the place. Didn't expect it to be family." "Distant family," Marcus clarified. "I barely knew him growing up." Jack nodded, looking around the property with the practiced eye of someone who understood mechanical systems and structural integrity. "Going to try to get it running again?" "Haven't decided yet," Marcus admitted. "Still figuring out what I'm dealing with." Jack's expression grew more serious. "Word of advice then. If anyone comes around offering to buy this place, think real careful before you sell. This property has history. Not all of it good." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of history?" The older man glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, despite them being completely alone. "Back in my grandfather's time, this place was owned by some bad people. Really bad. The kind that made other bad people look like choir boys. They ran operations out of here until the feds shut them down. Rumor always was they left something behind, something folks have been looking for ever since." "The Morettis," Marcus said quietly. Jack's eyebrows rose. "So you know. That makes things interesting." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I don't know you, but Raymond trusted you enough to leave you this place. That counts for something. Just know that you're not the first person to come sniffing around here, looking for whatever the Morettis hid. There's been others over the years. Developers, treasure hunters, some folks who were probably connected to the old families. None of them got very far, but they all had one thing in common." "What's that?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "They all ended up leaving town real quick," Jack said grimly. "Either bought off, scared off, or in one case about 20 years back, found floating in the Ashford Reservoir." The message was clear. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. And some people will do whatever it takes to make sure they stay that way. Jack's warning hung in the air like smoke as Marcus watched the older man climb back into his pickup and drive away. The casual mention of a body in the reservoir wasn't just small-town gossip. It was a message delivered through the safety of historical distance, but urgent nonetheless. Marcus had faced enemy fire in Kandahar, had walked through villages where every doorway might hide a threat. He recognized danger when it presented itself, even wrapped in friendly advice from a weathered mechanic. The rest of the morning passed in productive silence. Marcus worked on securing the property, replacing broken locks, boarding up a few remaining exposed windows, making the place at least marginally defensible. The physical labor felt good, familiar. In the army, there was always something to fix, something to maintain. Here, alone at this forgotten gas station, the work gave him time to think without the crushing weight of uncertainty that had plagued him since his discharge. By noon, Marcus had created a basic inventory of what he was working with. The main building was structurally sound despite its appearance. The roof needed work, but the foundation was solid. The service bay was a loss, too far gone to salvage without major investment. But the office, the retail space, even the small back room that had probably served as storage, these could be restored with effort and modest funds. The question was whether he'd live long enough to see that happen. His phone rang just after 1, the engineering firm calling to confirm their appointment for the following day. Marcus stepped outside to take the call, his eyes constantly scanning the highway for vehicles that might slow down, for any sign of surveillance. Paranoia, maybe, but in his experience, paranoia kept you alive when situations turned dangerous. The technician assured him they'd arrive by 2 in the afternoon with ground-penetrating radar equipment, could have preliminary results within hours. After the call ended, Marcus returned to his uncle's journal, reading more carefully now, looking for details he might have missed in his initial scan. Raymond had been systematic in his research, tracking down every piece of information about the Moretti family's operations in the area. What emerged was a picture of an organization far more sophisticated than Marcus had imagined. The Morettis hadn't just been thugs with guns. They'd been businessmen, albeit criminal ones, who understood logistics, financial systems, political leverage. They'd owned legitimate businesses across 3 states, using them to launder money from their illegal operations. The gas station had been one node in a larger network, positioned strategically on a highway that connected major cities, perfect for moving goods and people without attracting attention. But in 1947, everything had collapsed. A federal task force, led by a prosecutor named William Hendricks, had spent years building a case against the family. The raid on Cole's Corner had been part of a coordinated strike across multiple locations. 3 Moretti associates had died in the firefight here. The family's patriarch, Salvatore Moretti, had been arrested at his estate 50 miles away. Within months, the entire organization was dismantled, its members imprisoned or scattered. What interested Marcus most was what hadn't been found. Federal agents had seized assets worth millions, but prosecutors believed the Morettis had hidden significantly more. Cash, bonds, gold, jewelry taken in various criminal enterprises over decades. The family had known they were under investigation, had time to move their most valuable assets somewhere safe. Multiple family members had gone to prison rather than reveal where that somewhere might be. Raymond's notes included a newspaper clipping from 1952. Salvatore Moretti had died in federal prison, maintaining until his last breath that he'd left nothing behind, that the government had taken everything. But his lawyer, interviewed after the old man's death, had made a cryptic statement. Salvatore always said the family's true legacy was buried where the law would never think to look. He went to his grave smiling about that. Marcus checked the time. 3 hours until sunset. He wanted to examine the 4th tank more thoroughly before darkness fell, but he also needed to be smart about it. If Castellano really was watching the property, any obvious excavation would raise alarms. He needed the radar survey first, needed to know exactly what he was dealing with before he made any irreversible moves. The afternoon stretched long as Marcus explored every corner of the property with fresh eyes. The service bay, despite its decrepit condition, yielded interesting discoveries. Beneath layers of dirt and debris, he found old tie-down points in the concrete floor, reinforced anchor systems far stronger than any legitimate repair shop would need. places where heavy objects had been secured, perhaps during transfers from trucks to other vehicles. Evidence of the station's true purpose during the Moretti era. In the far corner of the bay, Marcus noticed something odd about the concrete. A rectangular section, about 4 feet by 6 feet, showed slightly different weathering than the surrounding floor. He knelt down, running his fingers along the edges, feeling a barely perceptible seam. His pulse quickened. This wasn't part of the original pour. Someone had cut into the concrete, then patched it, probably decades ago. The question was whether they'd been hiding something or retrieving it. Marcus found a pry bar in the debris and began working at the seam. The concrete was old, brittle in places. After 20 minutes of careful effort, he managed to lift one corner. Beneath was dirt, recently disturbed relative to the age of the building. Someone had dug here, then resealed everything. His uncle Raymond, maybe, searching for the Moretti treasure. Or someone else, someone who'd found what they were looking for and left this false trail to throw off future searchers. The sound of a vehicle approaching made Marcus quickly push the concrete section back into place and scatter debris over it to hide his work. He emerged from the service bay just as a sheriff's department cruiser pulled into the lot. The deputy who stepped out was young, probably mid-20s, with the careful posture of someone still learning the job. "Afternoon," the deputy called out. "Got a call about possible trespassing at this location." "You the new owner?" "Marcus Cole." He showed his identification and the property documents the lawyer had provided. "Just inherited it from my uncle Raymond." The deputy examined the papers, then handed them back with a nod. "Sorry for the confusion. Dispatch said someone reported suspicious activity. You planning to reopen the station?" "Haven't decided yet," Marcus replied carefully. "Still assessing what needs to be done." "Did the caller say what seemed suspicious?" The deputy shrugged. "Anonymous call. Just said they saw someone breaking into the building. But if you own the place, no crime being committed." He glanced around the property. "Word of advice, though. This area gets some rough characters passing through. Tweakers looking for copper wire, kids looking for a place to party. Might want to consider better security until you figure out your plans." After the deputy left, Marcus stood in the fading sunlight, thinking through what had just happened. An anonymous call about trespassing, shortly after Jack Mitchell's visit, shortly after Castellano's bout offer. Someone was watching the property, keeping tabs on his activities. The question was whether they were trying to scare him off, or simply monitoring him to see what he might find. As evening approached, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane to his rational mind just days ago. He was going to stay at the property, not just visit during daylight hours. If someone was watching, he needed to know their patterns, their timing, their methods. You couldn't defend a position you didn't occupy. Basic military doctrine, now applied to a civilian mystery that was rapidly feeling more dangerous than he'd anticipated. He set up a makeshift camp in the office, using a sleeping bag and supplies he'd bought in town. The building had running water, though it ran rust-colored until it cleared, and the electricity meant he could charge his phone and laptop. More importantly, from the office window, he had clear sight lines to the highway, the fuel tanks, and the service bay. Anyone approaching would have to come within his view unless they hiked in from the surrounding fields. Night fell with the sudden completeness of rural areas far from city lights. Marcus sat in darkness, letting his eyes adjust, watching the property take on new shapes and shadows. Around 10, a vehicle passed on the highway, slowing near the station but not stopping. Marcus noted the make and model, a dark sedan that might have been the same one from the previous night. 15 minutes later, another passed from the opposite direction. Definitely surveillance. Professional enough to use multiple approaches, but not sophisticated enough to vary their timing significantly. Around midnight, Marcus heard something that made his combat instincts surge to full alert. The soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, approaching from behind the service bay where there was no vehicle access. Someone on foot, moving carefully but not carefully enough to be completely silent. Marcus moved to a position where he could see through a crack in the boarded window, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he no longer carried before settling on the heavy wrench he'd been using earlier. The figure that emerged into the moonlight was smaller than he'd expected, moving with cautious purpose toward the fourth fuel tank. They carried what looked like a flashlight in one hand and something else Marcus couldn't identify in the other. When they bent down near the tank access cap, Marcus made his decision. He slipped out the back door of the office, circling wide to approach from behind, using skills he'd honed in dozens of night patrols in hostile territory. He was within 10 feet when the figure sensed his presence and spun around, the flashlight beam catching Marcus full in the face. For a moment, they stared at each other. Then the intruder bolted, running toward the tree line behind the property. Marcus pursued, closing the distance quickly, his longer legs and military fitness giving him the advantage. He caught up at the edge of the trees, grabbing the runner's jacket and pulling them both to the ground in a controlled fall that wouldn't cause injury but would definitely end the chase. "Get off me," a woman's voice gasped. "I'm not here to rob you." Marcus held his position, not loosening his grip. "Then what are you here for?" "Breaking and entering at midnight." The woman twisted to look at him, and in the moonlight filtering through the trees, Marcus saw she was young, probably early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her expression was more frustrated than frightened. "I'm doing research. Historical research. This property has significance to my thesis work." "At midnight." Marcus's tone made clear how little he believed that explanation. "When else am I supposed to come?" "During business hours when the property owner who doesn't know me and probably wouldn't give permission is here." She had a point, though Marcus wasn't about to concede it. "Look, my name is Sarah Chun. I'm a graduate student at Ashford University, History Department. I've been studying organized crime in this region, specifically the Moretti family operations. This gas station was one of their key locations." Marcus loosened his grip slightly, but didn't let go. "So you're what, grave robbing for your dissertation?" "I'm documenting," Sarah said firmly. "There's a difference. The historical record of this site is incomplete. I've been trying to get permission to do a proper archaeological survey for 2 years, but the previous owner never responded to my requests." "That would be my uncle Raymond," Marcus said. "Did you ever meet him?" Sarah shook her head. "Just sent letters. I think he was protective of the property. Maybe he knew something about what might be here." She looked at Marcus with sudden intensity. "Did he leave you any information? Papers, maps, anything about the site's history?" Marcus made a calculation. This woman could be exactly what she claimed, an overeager graduate student willing to trespass for her research. Or she could be working for someone else, sent to find out what he knew. Trust was dangerous, but isolation was worse. He needed all eyes if he was going to navigate whatever conspiracy he'd stumbled into. "Let's go inside and talk," he said finally, releasing her and standing. "But if you try to run or pull anything, understand I'm trained to stop you without hurting you." Usually. They walked back to the office in tense silence. Marcus noticed Sarah limping slightly, probably from their tumble at the tree line. Inside, he turned on a single lamp and gestured for her to sit. She did, pulling out her phone and showing him her university identification. Then her research credentials. Then a folder of documents about the Moretti family that matched much of what he'd found in his uncle's papers. "You've done your homework," Marcus admitted. "It's my job," Sarah replied. "Or it will be if I can finish this dissertation." The Moretti case is fascinating because so much of their operation remains mysterious. The federal prosecution was thorough, but there were gaps. Money and assets that disappeared. Associates who were never identified. And persistent rumors about this location specifically, about something hidden that was never recovered. Marcus made his decision. He retrieved his uncle's journal and handed it to her. My uncle Raymond was investigating the same things. He believed there's a vault beneath the 4th fuel tank, built by the Morettis to hide something valuable. Sarah's eyes widened as she read through Raymond's notes. This is incredible. He actually documented. She paused, looking up. Wait, you said beneath the 4th tank. Have you opened it? Gone down there? Not yet, Marcus said. I've got a ground-penetrating radar survey scheduled for tomorrow. I want to know what I'm dealing with before I commit to any excavation. But here's what you need to know. Someone else is interested in this property. A developer named Castellano offered to buy it before I'd even unpacked. And tonight, before you showed up, there were vehicles surveilling the place. I think whoever's behind that knows about the vault, or at least suspects it exists. Sarah's expression grew troubled. Castellano. That's not a common name. In my research, I found references to a Castellano family that had business dealings with the Morettis. Not direct members of the organization, but connected. If they're still around, still interested in this property after all these years, then whatever's hidden here must be worth more than money. What do you mean? Marcus asked. The Morettis kept records, Sarah explained. Detailed records of their operations, their payoffs to police and politicians, their business partnerships with supposedly legitimate companies. If those records still exist, they could destroy reputations, reveal crimes that were never prosecuted, connect current powerful families to organized crime. She looked at Marcus intently. That kind of information doesn't have an expiration date. It's worth killing for, even 80 years later. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture far more complex and dangerous than Marcus had imagined. He wasn't just hunting for buried treasure. He was threatening to expose secrets that powerful people had spent generations protecting. The kind of secrets that left bodies in reservoirs. Sarah closed the journal and handed it back. I can help you. My research gives us historical context, helps us understand what we're looking for and who might be trying to stop us. And I have academic credentials, which means I can request official surveys and permits that you probably can't get as a private citizen. In exchange for what? Marcus asked. First access to whatever we find for your dissertation. Sarah smiled slightly. That, and the truth. I went into this field because I believe in uncovering history, not letting it be buried by people with power. If there's evidence down there of corruption and crime, it should be made public. Justice doesn't expire just because the guilty got away with it long enough. Marcus found himself respecting her conviction, even as he recognized the naivety in it. Justice was a luxury. Survival came first. But having someone with expertise and resources on his side wasn't something he could afford to turn down. And something about her fierce determination reminded him of why he'd joined the army in the first place. The belief that some fights were worth having, even when the odds weren't in your favor. All right, he said. We work together. But we do this smart. No more midnight visits that could get you shot by a jumpy veteran. We use the radar survey to confirm what's down there. Then we figure out how to access it safely and legally. And if things get dangerous, we don't hesitate to bring in the authorities. Sarah nodded. Agreed. Though I should warn you, if the Castellano family really is involved, local authorities might not be completely clean. The Morettis bought a lot of loyalty in this county. Some of those relationships could have survived through generations. Then we find authorities who aren't local, Marcus said. Federal, if necessary. The FBI dealt with the Morettis once. They can deal with their legacy now. They spent the next hour going through their combined information, creating a timeline of the Moretti operations, identifying key players and possible modern connections. Sarah had academic rigor that complemented Raymond's obsessive documentation. Together, the picture that emerged was startling in its scope. The Morettis hadn't just been criminals. They'd been architects of a system that had corrupted institutions and enriched powerful families for decades. And this gas station, this forgotten pit stop on a lonely highway, had been one of the keystones of that system. By the time Sarah left, promising to return the next day for the radar survey, dawn was breaking over Highway 52. Marcus watched her old sedan disappear toward town, then turned back to survey his property with new understanding. Somewhere beneath his feet, buried in concrete and earth, was evidence that could rewrite history. The question was whether he could bring it to light before the people who'd spent 80 years keeping it buried decided he was too dangerous to live. The engineering van arrived precisely at 2 in the afternoon, pulling into the lot with professional efficiency. 2 technicians emerged, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a younger woman carrying what looked like sophisticated scanning equipment. Marcus met them at the fuel tanks, where Sarah had already arrived an hour earlier with coffee and a folder of additional historical documents she'd pulled from university archives overnight. Tom Brennan, the older technician, introduced himself, shaking Marcus's hand firmly. "This is my associate, Lisa Park. You mentioned wanting to survey underground fuel tanks for potential environmental assessment?" "That's right," Marcus confirmed. "Specifically, I need detailed imaging of what's beneath the surface. Depth, structure, any anomalies that might indicate contamination or structural issues." Lisa was already setting up the ground-penetrating radar equipment, a sophisticated array of sensors connected to a laptop that displayed real-time data. "Standard procedure is to grid the area and take multiple passes," she explained. "The radar can penetrate about 60 feet in ideal conditions, less if we hit dense materials like reinforced concrete or metal." They spent the next hour methodically scanning the area around all 4 fuel tanks. Marcus watched the laptop screen with growing fascination as the radar painted pictures of what lay beneath. The first 3 tanks appeared exactly as expected, cylindrical storage vessels buried at depths of 12 to 15 feet, their metal walls clearly visible on the scans. But when they reached the 4th tank, the one Raymond's notes had identified as special, the readings became dramatically different. "That's unusual," Tom said, frowning at the display. "You're showing a much deeper structure here. We're reading metal at 40 feet, maybe more. And there's something else." He adjusted the settings, enhancing the image. "There's a secondary chamber. Looks like it's offset from the main shaft. Access through some kind of connection point about 30 feet down." Sarah leaned in, her eyes bright with excitement. "Can you tell how large the chamber is?" Lisa worked the controls, taking additional passes from different angles. "Based on what we're seeing, I'd estimate maybe 10 feet by 12 feet. Not huge, but significant. And the construction is heavy. Reinforced concrete walls, metal plating. This wasn't built to hold fuel. This was built like a vault." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Can you tell if there's anything inside it?" Tom shook his head. "Radar shows structure, not contents. But the chamber is definitely there, and it's sealed. No obvious breaches or collapse. Whatever this is, it's been maintained in stable condition for a long time." After the technicians finished their work and departed with promises to send a detailed report within days, Marcus and Sarah stood by the 4th tank, staring at the innocuous-looking access cap that concealed so much more beneath. "This is real," Sarah said quietly. "Everything your uncle suspected, everything the historical record hinted at. There's actually a Moretti vault down there. The question is what's in it," Marcus replied. "And whether opening it is going to get us killed." They moved their discussion to the office, where Marcus had set up his laptop with the notes and documents they'd compiled. Sarah pulled up historical records of the 1947 raid, focusing on the aftermath and the subsequent investigations. "According to federal records," she explained, "the prosecution believed the Morettis had hidden approximately $3 million in cash and valuables. That's in 1947 dollars, So adjust for inflation, and you're looking at maybe 40 million in today's money. But that's just the financial assets. The real value was in the records. The Morettis kept detailed books of every operation, every payoff, every business deal. Names, dates, amounts. Evidence that could have brought down dozens of supposedly legitimate businessmen and public officials. So why didn't they use it? Marcus asked. Why not trade the information for reduced sentences? Pride, Sarah suggested. Or maybe leverage. As long as those records existed somewhere, the people named in them had reason to keep the family members alive and relatively comfortable in prison. It was insurance. But eventually, everyone who knew the location died, taking the secret with them. Marcus considered this. Until my uncle started digging, literally, he must have gotten close enough to make someone nervous. That's why Castellano showed up so fast after I inherited. They've been monitoring this property, waiting for someone to find what Raymond was looking for. A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus tensed, hand moving toward the wrench he'd kept close since the previous night. Through the window, he saw Jack Mitchell's pickup truck in the lot. The mechanic stood on the porch, but he wasn't alone. An elderly man in a worn suit stood beside him, leaning heavily on a cane. Marcus opened the door cautiously. Jack nodded in greeting. Sorry to drop by unannounced. This is Arthur Hendricks. He's got something you need to hear. The old man's eyes were sharp despite his age, studying Marcus with obvious assessment. You look like your uncle, he said, his voice rough but clear. Same stubborn set to the jaw. Raymond was a good man. Tried to do right by this place. By the truth. They settled in the office, Marcus offering the only chair to Arthur, while the others found seats on various surfaces. Jack stood by the door, keeping watch on the highway in a way that suggested he expected trouble. Arthur Hendricks, Marcus said slowly, processing the name. Related to William Hendricks? The prosecutor who went after the Morettis. My father, Arthur confirmed. He spent 5 years building that case, putting his career and his life on the line to bring them down. The raid here was his operation. 3 men died that night. He never quite forgave himself for that, even though they were shooting at federal agents. Sarah leaned forward. The historical records say your father believed the Morettis hid assets before the raid. Did he ever tell you where he thought they might be? Arthur's lined face creased in something between a smile and a grimace. He knew exactly where they were. Right here, beneath our feet. He investigated this property for months after the raid, brought in engineers and surveyors. But he couldn't prove there was anything down there, and his superiors wouldn't authorize the expense of extensive excavation for what might be a wild guess. So the case closed, the Morettis went to prison, and the vault stayed sealed. But he told you about it, Marcus said. On his deathbed, Arthur confirmed. Made me promise something. If the vault was ever opened, if the truth ever came out, I was to make sure it was done right. Not for money or revenge, but for justice. All those people, the Morettis corrupted, all the crimes they facilitated, they should be exposed. The guilty should be named, even if they're long dead. Sarah's eyes were shining. That's exactly what my research is about. Historical accountability. The truth doesn't stop mattering just because time passes. Arthur turned his attention to her. You're the graduate student. Raymond mentioned you in one of our conversations. Said you'd been trying to get access to the property for your studies. He respected that, wanted to help you, but he was worried about drawing attention before he was ready. You knew my uncle, Marcus said, surprised. We talked occasionally, Arthur replied. After he figured out what was down there, he reached out to me. Wanted to know if I could verify his findings against my father's notes. I did. Everything matched. The architectural drawings, the construction timeline, even some coded references in Moretti correspondence that my father had seized but never fully deciphered. Jack spoke up from his position by the door. "Tell them the rest, Arthur." "About the Castellanos." The old man's expression darkened. The Castellano family were business partners with the Morettis. Supplied them with trucks and warehouses, helped move stolen goods. They were never prosecuted because my father couldn't prove they knew the merchandise was illegal. They claimed they were just running a logistics company, had no idea their clients were criminals. After the Moretti collapse, the Castellanos expanded, took over some of the legitimate businesses, became respectable. But they never forgot about the vault. Because the records down there could prove their family's involvement, Sarah realized. "Exactly," Arthur said. "If the Moretti books are as detailed as my father believed, they'll show payments to the Castellanos, shipment records, maybe even evidence of more serious crimes. The current generation has built their wealth and reputation on the foundation their grandparents laid. Exposing that foundation as criminal would destroy everything. That's why Richard Castellano wants to buy this property," Marcus said. "It's not about development. It's about keeping the vault sealed forever." Arthur nodded slowly. "And if buying doesn't work, they'll try other methods. The Castellanos have always been good at making problems disappear. They've had 80 years of practice. The weight of what they were dealing with settled over the room like a physical presence. This wasn't just about buried treasure or historical curiosity anymore. They were threatening powerful people with exposure, with the loss of everything their families had built on lies and corruption. The kind of threat that got people killed, veteran or not. "What do you think we should do?" Marcus asked Arthur directly. The old man was quiet for a long moment. "My father believed in the law, in justice through proper channels. He'd want you to document everything, contact federal authorities, do this by the book. But he also learned the hard way that local power can corrupt even federal investigations. The Castellanos have connections, money, influence. They'll use every trick they can to bury this again. So we need leverage," Sarah said. "We need to make sure that if something happens to any of us, the information still gets out. Dead man's switch, essentially." Marcus nodded, his military training providing the framework. "We document everything we know, everything we find. We create multiple copies, store them with different people in different locations. We set up a system where if we don't check in regularly, the information automatically goes to media outlets and law enforcement agencies beyond the Castellanos' reach." "I can help with that," Jack offered. "I've got friends out of state, people who aren't connected to anything around here. They can hold on to materials, release them if necessary." Arthur reached into his jacket and withdrew an old key, similar in style to the one Marcus had found in his uncle's papers. "This was my father's. He made it years after the raid, had it fashioned from drawings he'd made of the vault's lock mechanism. He never used it, never had the chance. But he kept it, just in case the day came when the truth could finally be told." Marcus took the key, feeling its weight, understanding the responsibility it represented. This wasn't just about personal gain or academic achievement anymore. This was about finishing what William Hendricks had started, what Raymond Cole had died trying to complete. This was about proving that justice didn't have an expiration date, that powerful families couldn't simply outlast accountability. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning their approach. Sarah would use her academic credentials to file formal research permits, creating a paper trail that would make it harder for the Castellanos to act against them without drawing attention. Jack would reach out to his network, setting up the dead man's switch with trusted contacts in 3 different states. Arthur would contact a retired FBI agent who'd worked organized crime cases in the region, someone who might be willing to provide unofficial guidance or even official support if the evidence was strong enough. Marcus's role was the most dangerous. He would be the one to actually open the vault, to descend into that 40-foot shaft and retrieve whatever the Morettis had left behind. It was his property, his inheritance, his fight. And after 8 years in combat zones, He knew how to operate in hostile territory when the odds weren't in his favor. As the others prepared to leave, Sarah pulled Marcus aside. "You don't have to do this, you know. We could just turn everything over to the authorities right now, let them handle it." Marcus shook his head. "We both know that won't work. The Castellanos will use their influence to stall any investigation, maybe even get the evidence suppressed or lost. The only way this works is if we control the narrative, if we bring the evidence out in a way that can't be ignored or buried." Sarah studied his face. "You're used to this, aren't you? Operating in dangerous situations, trusting your instincts over official procedures. The Army taught me that sometimes you have to take the objective before you call in support," Marcus replied. "Otherwise the enemy has time to prepare, to reinforce their position. We've got one advantage right now. The Castellanos don't know how much we know or how close we are to opening that vault. Once we lose surprise, we lose everything." After everyone had gone, Marcus stood alone in the gathering darkness, looking at the fourth fuel tank. Somewhere down there was a chamber that had remained sealed for nearly 80 years. A time capsule of crime and corruption, evidence that could rewrite local history and destroy powerful families. All he had to do was find a way to reach it without getting killed in the process. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief and chilling. "Whatever you think you're going to find isn't worth your life. Take the money and walk away while you still can." Marcus deleted the message without responding. Threats only worked if you valued safety over purpose. He'd joined the Army because he believed some things were worth fighting for, even when the cost was high. He'd survived 2 combat tours by learning when to advance and when to hold position. And every instinct he'd honed in those years told him this was a fight worth having. The Castellanos had spent 80 years believing their secrets were safe, that the Moretti vault would remain buried forever. They'd underestimated Raymond Cole's determination, and now they were underestimating his. That was their mistake. And Marcus intended to make sure it was a fatal one, at least for their carefully constructed lies. Tomorrow, he would begin the descent into the past. Tonight, he would prepare for whatever the future might bring. Because the truth buried beneath Cole's corner was about to see daylight for the first time in nearly a century, and no amount of money or influence was going to stop it. Marcus woke before dawn, his body conditioned by years of military routine to function on minimal sleep. Today was the day. All the planning, all the preparation, came down to this single moment. He'd spent the previous evening assembling equipment. A climbing harness borrowed from Jack, high-intensity flashlights, a rope rated for 3 times his body weight, and tools that might be needed to breach whatever seal the Morettis had placed on their vault. Sarah would arrive at sunrise with her documentation equipment, cameras and recording devices to capture everything they found. Arthur had promised to be present as witness, representing his father's legacy and decades of waiting for this truth to emerge. The property was quiet in those pride-on hours, the kind of stillness that made every sound feel amplified. Marcus performed a perimeter check, a habit from patrol duty that had saved his life more than once. Everything appeared normal, no signs of overnight visitors or surveillance. But he knew better than to assume safety from absence of obvious threat. The Castellanos were sophisticated operators, descendants of people who'd built criminal empires while maintaining respectable facades. They wouldn't announce their presence until they were ready to act. By the time Sarah's sedan pulled into the lot, Marcus had removed the access cap from the 4th tank and set up lighting to illuminate the shaft below. The morning sun was just breaking the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed incongruous with the gravity of what they were about to attempt. Arthur arrived moments later, Jack driving him in the pickup truck, both men looking grim but determined. "This is it," Sarah said quietly, standing at the edge of the shaft and peering down into darkness that her flashlight couldn't fully penetrate. "Everything changes after this. Whatever we find down there, There's no putting it back. Marcus secured his harness and checked his equipment one final time. That's the point. Some truths aren't meant to stay buried, no matter how much time passes or how many powerful people want them hidden. My uncle understood that. Your father understood that, he said, nodding to Arthur. Now it's our turn to finish what they started. The descent was methodical and careful. Marcus rappelled down the shaft, using the rope and harness to control his speed, his flashlight illuminating metal walls that showed no signs of corrosion despite their age. The Morettis had built this to last, understanding that whatever they hid here might need to remain concealed for decades. At 30 feet, Marcus reached the junction point the radar had identified, a reinforced portal sealed with a heavy door. The lock was exactly as Arthur's father had described, an intricate mechanism that would resist anything short of explosives. Marcus retrieved the key Arthur had given him, the one fashioned from drawings made 80 years ago by a prosecutor who died without seeing his work completed. For a moment, he hesitated. Once that door opened, everything would change. Lives would be disrupted, reputations destroyed, families torn apart by revelations of ancestral crimes. But then he thought of his grandmother Carol, whom he'd never met, dying from cancer caused by chemicals the Castellanos had helped the Morettis distribute. He thought of Raymond, spending his final years alone, investigating crimes no one else cared about. He thought of all the victims whose stories had been buried along with the evidence. The key turned smoothly, as if the lock had been waiting all these years for this specific moment. Marcus felt resistance, then a click, then the door swung inward on hinges that moved with surprising ease. Beyond was a chamber, exactly as the radar had shown, 10 feet by 12 feet, lined with metal shelving units that held what appeared to be dozens of storage boxes. Marcus's hands were steady as he entered, his training keeping him calm, even as his mind raced with the implications of what surrounded him. The boxes were labeled with codes that meant nothing to Marcus, but their contents told a clear story. Bundles of cash, mostly in denominations from the 1940s, probably worth far less than their face value now, but still impressive in sheer volume. Jewelry and watches, some with inscriptions that might help identify their original owners, victims of robberies that had never been solved. But the real treasure, the items that made Marcus's pulse quicken, were the ledgers. Dozens of them, leather-bound volumes filled with handwritten entries documenting years of criminal operations. "I'm in," Marcus called up the shaft, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Sarah, you need to see this. There's enough evidence here to rewrite the entire history of organized crime in this region." Sarah descended next, moving carefully but quickly, her camera already recording as soon as she cleared the entrance. When she saw the shelves, the boxes, the carefully preserved records, her expression was one of pure scholarly joy mixed with something deeper. "This is incredible. This is going to change everything we thought we knew about the Moretti operations, their reach, their connections. They worked systematically, photographing everything before touching it, documenting the exact position and condition of each item. The ledgers were organized by year, starting in 1935 and running through early 1947, just weeks before the federal raid. Each entry detailed a transaction, payoffs to police officers and politicians, payments to the Castellanos for logistic support, income from various illegal enterprises. Names Marcus recognized from local history were scattered throughout, respectable citizens who'd secretly profited from organized crime. One ledger in particular caught Sarah's attention, its cover marked with the Castellano name. Inside were detailed records of the family's involvement, not just as passive logistics providers, but as active partners in criminal operations. Shipments of stolen goods, warehouse rentals for illegal gambling operations, even a notation about disposing of remains after a murder the Morettis had committed to protect mutual interests. This wasn't circumstantial evidence. This was a complete documentation of decades of criminal conspiracy. Arthur descended last, moving slowly with his cane. determined to see with his own eyes what his father had died believing existed. When he reached the chamber floor and saw the ledgers spread before him, tears streamed down his weathered face. He would have been so proud, the old man said quietly. All those years of work, of fighting against people who told him he was chasing ghosts. He was right. He was right about everything. Marcus understood that feeling, that vindication of someone's life work being proven valid. His uncle Raymond deserved the same recognition, the same acknowledgement that his obsession hadn't been paranoia but dedication to truth. They photographed Arthur holding one of the ledgers, creating an image that connected past to present, showing that justice delayed was not the same as justice denied. They were so absorbed in their documentation that none of them heard the vehicles approaching until it was too late. The sound of car doors slamming, multiple vehicles, brought Marcus's combat instincts surging to full alert. He moved to the shaft entrance, looking up to see shadows moving across the opening 40 feet above. Then a voice, cold and familiar, echoed down. "Mr. Cole, I really wish you'd taken my offer. This could have been so much simpler for everyone." Richard Castellano stood at the edge of the shaft, flanked by two men Marcus recognized as the ones who'd been surveilling the property. Behind them, more figures were moving, securing the perimeter with the efficiency of professionals. Marcus assessed the situation with the detached calculation of someone trained for combat scenarios. They were trapped, outnumbered, with no immediate escape route. But they also had leverage. Everything in this vault had already been photographed, documented, uploaded to Sarah's cloud storage. Whatever happened next, the evidence would survive. "It's over, Castellano," Marcus called up. "Everything down here has been documented and backed up. Even if you do something stupid right now, the truth is already out there. Multiple people have copies. Federal contacts have been notified. You can't bury this again." Castellano's laugh was bitter. "You think I'm here to bury it? That ship has sailed the moment you opened that vault. No, Mr. Cole, I'm here to negotiate. My family's legacy is about to be destroyed. But perhaps we can come to an arrangement that limits the damage." Sarah was recording everything, her camera capturing both the vault's contents and the conversation happening above. Marcus realized that Castellano had made a critical mistake. By showing up personally, by threatening them directly, he was creating evidence of obstruction, of witness intimidation. The kind of evidence that even family connections and expensive lawyers couldn't make disappear. "There's nothing to negotiate," Arthur called out, his voice stronger than Marcus had heard it. "The evidence speaks for itself. Your family profited from organized crime for decades. That's not something you can negotiate away or buy your silence about. The truth doesn't work that way." For a long moment, there was silence from above. Then Castellano spoke again, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. The connections my family has, the people who owe us favors going back generations. Even if this evidence goes public, we'll survive. We always do. But you," he paused meaningfully, "you're isolated, vulnerable. Accidents happen. Especially to people who make powerful enemies." Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him. This was what he'd trained for, what 8 years in the military had prepared him to handle. Threats from enemies who thought power and intimidation were enough to win. But he'd learned in places far more dangerous than rural highways that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to act despite it, to stand for something larger than personal safety. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus called up, his voice carrying the command authority of someone used to leading troops in combat. "In approximately 5 minutes, state police are going to arrive. We arranged that before we opened this vault, a precaution in case something exactly like this happened. When they get here, we're going to turn over all this evidence to them. Everything your family has spent 80 years hiding. And you're going to be arrested for witness intimidation, trespassing, and probably half a dozen other charges once they review what we've recorded." Castellano's response was a string of profanity that confirmed Marcus had struck a nerve. The sounds from above became more agitated, voices arguing, the distinctive sounds of people debating whether to escalate or retreat. Marcus used the time to secure the most critical ledgers in a waterproof bag he'd brought, understanding that preservation of evidence was now the mission priority. Then, cutting through the tension like a blade, came the sound of sirens. Not the single unit of a local sheriff, but multiple vehicles, approaching fast. Marcus felt relief surge through him, though he kept his expression neutral. Sarah had indeed made the call earlier, time to give them enough privacy to document the vault, but not so much time that they'd be left vulnerable to exactly what Castellano had attempted. The next 30 minutes were chaos of a controlled variety. State police secured the scene, taking statements, photographing the vault, carefully retrieving evidence under Sarah's guidance. Castellano and his associates were detained, though Marcus knew their expensive lawyers would have them released within hours. But the damage was done. The evidence was secured, documented, and now in the hands of authorities who were outside the family's sphere of influence. A senior investigator, a woman named Detective Morrison, who specialized in cold cases, descended into the vault with Arthur at her side. Her expression as she surveyed the ledgers and records was one of professional satisfaction, mixed with something deeper. "This is going to reopen dozens of unsolved cases," she said. "Murders, robberies, corruption cases that went cold because the evidence disappeared. Your uncle would be proud," she told Marcus. "And your father," she added to Arthur. "This is the kind of police work that changes history." By late afternoon, the vault had been emptied, every item cataloged and removed for analysis. Marcus stood with Sarah and Arthur as the sun began its descent, watching state police vehicles depart with evidence that would reshape understanding of the region's criminal history. The property that had seemed like a burden just days ago now felt like something else. A memorial to persistence, to the idea that truth had value independent of time or power. Sarah was already planning her dissertation, outlining chapters that would use the Moretti ledgers to explore how organized crime shaped legitimate business and politics across generations. Arthur had been interviewed by 3 news outlets, finally able to tell his father's story of dedication to justice despite overwhelming obstacles. And Jack had quietly informed Marcus that several families who'd lost loved ones to unsolved crimes decades ago were already reaching out, hoping the Moretti records might finally provide answers. Marcus sat in the office that night, alone with his thoughts and a bottle of Jack Daniels that Jack had left with a note saying some occasions called for better than beer. He thought about Raymond, spending his final years chasing a truth everyone else dismissed as paranoid fantasy. He thought about William Hendricks, building a case that would outlive him by generations. He thought about his own journey from broke veteran with no prospects to someone who'd helped expose a conspiracy that had survived nearly 80 years. His phone buzzed with a message from the lawyer who'd first contacted him about the inheritance. Multiple media outlets were requesting interviews. A documentary production company wanted to option the story. A publishing house was interested in a book about the discovery. Marcus deleted all of it. This wasn't about fame or profit. This was about finishing what better men had started, about proving that justice didn't have an expiration date, that power and money couldn't ultimately defeat truth. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the same spot, but the property looked completely different. The main building had been restored, its fresh paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. The sign above the door read Raymond Cole Memorial Research Center, dedicated to investigating unsolved crimes and historical injustices. Sarah had taken a position as lead researcher, using the Moretti ledgers as the foundation for ongoing investigations. Arthur served on the board, ensuring his father's legacy continued in practical application rather than just memory. The fuel tanks had been properly sealed and decommissioned. The fourth one preserved as a historical site after consultation with the State Historical Society. Tour groups visited regularly, learning about the Moretti operations, the long investigation that finally brought them to light, and the broader lessons about accountability and perseverance. The Castellano family had fallen from grace spectacularly. Indictments had been issued, not just for Richard's actions at the gas station, but for ongoing corruption revealed by the Moretti ledgers. Business partnerships collapsed, political allies distanced themselves, and the carefully constructed empire built on criminal foundations began its inevitable collapse. Justice, it turned out, might be slow, but it had remarkable endurance. Marcus had used his portion of the reward money, offered by families whose cases were finally solved, to fund the research center and create a scholarship for veterans pursuing higher education. The rest he donated to environmental cleanup efforts, thinking of how contamination from the Moretti era had affected communities for generations. Money couldn't undo that damage, but it could help prevent future harm. He'd found his purpose after all, not in rebuilding a gas station or returning to military service, but in creating something that honored those who'd fought for truth when no one else would. Raymond's obsessive documentation, William Hendricks's unwavering prosecution, even the Moretti's own meticulous record-keeping that had ultimately condemned them. All of it had led to this moment, to a center dedicated to ensuring that power couldn't simply outlast accountability. Sarah approached as Marcus stood surveying the property, a folder of new cases in her hands. "There's something you should see," she said. "We've been contacted by families in 3 other states with similar stories. Gas stations, warehouses, properties, where organized crime families might have hidden evidence that was never recovered. They want to know if we can help them find the truth." Marcus took the folder, feeling that familiar surge of purpose. This wasn't just about the Morettis anymore. It was about a principle, about proving that dedication and courage could overcome even the most entrenched corruption. His inheritance hadn't been a burden after all. It had been a calling, waiting patiently beneath concrete and earth for someone willing to bring it into the light. As the sun set over Highway 52, Marcus thought about all the veterans struggling to find meaning after service, all the people who felt powerless against systems designed to protect the guilty. His story, Raymond's story, the story of that vault beneath Cole's Corner, proved something essential. That one person, armed with nothing but determination and unwillingness to accept injustice, could change history. That the truth, no matter how deeply buried, had a way of finding those brave enough to dig for it. And that legacy wasn't about what you inherited, but what you chose to do with it. The broke veteran who'd arrived at a derelict gas station with $2,000 and no prospects had found something worth far more than any buried treasure. He'd found proof that justice, though it might take decades or even generations, ultimately prevailed when good people refused to give up. And in that discovery, he'd found himself. 5 years had passed since Marcus Cole first stood before the derelict gas station with nothing but a duffel bag and uncertain future. The transformation of both the property and the man himself had become something of a legend in Ashford and beyond. The Raymond Cole Memorial Research Center now occupied not just the original gas station building, but an adjacent structure Marcus had constructed with careful attention to honoring the site's history while serving its new purpose. Morning light filtered through the windows of Marcus's office as he reviewed the week's schedule. 3 new cases had come in, each one a thread connecting to that original discovery in the Moretti vault. A family in Pennsylvania believed their grandfather's unsolved murder was connected to organized crime operations similar to the Morettis. A woman in Ohio had inherited a warehouse with suspicious architectural features that matched the patterns Sarah had identified in her research. A retired police officer in Virginia wanted help investigating cold cases he'd never been allowed to pursue during his career due to political pressure. Sarah entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, her doctoral dissertation now complete and published to significant academic acclaim. She'd been offered positions at prestigious universities, but had chosen to stay at the center, believing the work they were doing had more impact than any tenure-track position could provide. "Marcus, we've got visitors. The Martinez family from the Pennsylvania case. They drove through the night to be here." The Martinez family consisted of 3 generations. Grandmother Elena, who'd been just a child when her father disappeared in 1952. Her daughter Sophia, and Sophia's teenage son Daniel. They sat in the conference room, surrounded by the careful documentation that had become the center's trademark. Photographs, maps, timelines, all the tools Raymond Cole had pioneered in his solitary investigation, now applied with greater resources and expertise. Elena's hands trembled as she held a photograph of her father. "He was a good man," she said quietly. "Worked in a factory, went to church, never caused trouble. But one night he didn't come home. Police said he probably ran off, abandoned us. But I knew better. My father would never do that." Marcus listened with the patience he'd learned over years of working with families who'd carried grief across decades. "What made you think organized crime was involved?" Sophia pulled out a folder of documents they'd compiled. "We found letters hidden in our grandmother's belongings after she passed. Letters from someone warning her to stop asking questions about what happened to her husband. The signature was just initials, but the threats were clear. And there was this." She laid out a business card, yellowed with age, for a trucking company. The logo matched one Marcus recognized from the Moretti ledgers. Sarah leaned forward, her researcher instincts engaged. "May I see that?" She photographed the card, then pulled up the digitized Moretti records on her laptop. Within minutes, she'd found references to the trucking company. They were Moretti Associates, used for transporting goods to Pennsylvania operations. "And look at this date." She pointed to an entry from October 1952. "Large shipment. Special handling required. Witness complications resolved." The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Elena's father hadn't abandoned his family. He'd seen something, knew something, and had been eliminated to protect the operation. The euphemistic language in the Moretti ledgers, "witness complications resolved," represented a life cut short, a family destroyed, decades of grief and unanswered questions. "We can help you," Marcus said firmly. "We have contacts with federal cold case units who specialize in organized crime investigations. The evidence in the Moretti records gives them jurisdiction to reopen cases across multiple states. It won't bring your grandfather back, but it can give you the truth. And maybe, finally, some justice." Daniel, who'd been quiet throughout the meeting, spoke up. "Is this what you do here?" "Help families like ours find answers about things that happened before we were even born." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly what we do. Because the truth doesn't stop mattering just because time passes. Your great-grandfather deserves to have his story told accurately, not buried under lies and threats. Your family deserves to know what really happened. And the people responsible, or their descendants who benefited from those crimes, they need to be held accountable." After the Martinez family left with promises of regular updates and a clear investigation plan, Marcus stood at the window overlooking the property. The 4th fuel tank, now preserved behind protective barriers with interpretive signage, had become an unexpected pilgrimage site. People came from across the country to see where decades of hidden truth had finally been exposed, to find inspiration in the story of persistence overcoming power. Jack's pickup pulled into the lot, and the mechanic emerged with his usual unhurried grace. He'd become an integral part of the center's operations, using his network of contacts to track down witnesses and sources who might otherwise remain hidden. His presence also provided a connection to the community, helping the center maintain relationships with locals who might have been suspicious of outsiders digging into old wounds. "Got something interesting," Jack said, settling into a chair in Marcus's office. "Remember that Virginia cop who contacted us? Turns out he's got evidence of continued Castellano family criminal activity. Nothing connected to the historical stuff, but current operations. Money laundering, fraud, intimidation tactics. He thinks if we can establish the pattern of behavior going back to the Moretti era, it strengthens the current cases against them. Marcus considered this carefully. The Castellano prosecutions from the original vault discovery had been partially successful. Richard Castellano had served 2 years for witness intimidation and obstruction. Before being released on technicalities his lawyers had exploited. The family's legitimate businesses had been damaged, but not destroyed. They'd proven resilient, adapting and rebuilding, though their reputation never fully recovered. "We need to be careful," Marcus said. "Our mission isn't vendetta. It's truth and justice. If there's genuine evidence of ongoing criminal activity, we help law enforcement build their case. But we don't go looking to destroy families just because their ancestors were criminals." Jack nodded approvingly. "That's the right way to think about it. Your Uncle Raymond understood that too. He wasn't after revenge. He just wanted the truth told and the guilty held accountable. There's a difference." Arthur Hendricks arrived for the weekly board meeting, moving more slowly now but still sharp as ever. At 92, he'd become the center's moral compass, the living connection to the original fight for justice that had inspired everything they were building. His presence at meetings and events gave weight to their work, demonstrated that this wasn't about sensationalism or profit, but about completing a mission that honorable people had dedicated their lives to. The board meeting covered operational matters, budgets, new cases, outreach programs. But it also included something Marcus had instituted from the beginning: time to reflect on why they did this work, what it meant beyond the practical outcomes. Too many organizations, he'd learned, lost sight of their purpose in the mechanics of operation. He was determined the center would remain focused on its core mission. "I received a letter this week," Arthur said as the meeting wound down, "from the daughter of one of the police officers named in the Moretti ledgers as receiving payoffs. She wanted to apologize for her father's corruption, to acknowledge the harm he'd caused. But she also wanted to thank us. She said knowing the truth, however painful, was better than living with the mythology of her father as an honest cop. The truth set her free from defending something that didn't deserve defense." Sarah wiped at her eyes. "That's why we do this. Not to destroy families or ruin reputations, but to replace comfortable lies with difficult truths. Because ultimately, truth is what allows real healing." Marcus thought about his own journey, from broke veteran to director of an organization that had helped resolve over 40 cold cases, exposed multiple instances of historical corruption, and provided closure to dozens of families. The financial rewards had been modest. The center operated mostly on grants and donations, paying its small staff reasonable salaries, but nothing extravagant. Yet Marcus had never felt richer. He'd found something the Army had taught him to value, but civilian life had seemed to lack: mission, purpose, brotherhood with people dedicated to something larger than themselves. Sarah, Jack, Arthur, the growing network of researchers, investigators, and advocates they'd assembled, these were his unit now. And the mission, ensuring that power and time couldn't permanently bury truth, was one worth dedicating his life to. Evening found Marcus back at the 4th fuel tank, a habit he'd developed over the years. Standing at the site where everything had changed, where his uncle's obsessive research had been vindicated, where the Moretti secrets had finally surfaced after 80 years of darkness. Tour groups were gone for the day, the property quiet except for the distant sound of highway traffic. He thought about Raymond, spending his final years alone, dismissed as paranoid, working in secret because no one else believed. He thought about William Hendricks, building a case that would outlast him by generations, dying before seeing the full extent of Moretti corruption revealed. He thought about all the victims, the families torn apart by violence and corruption, who'd never received justice in their lifetimes. But he also thought about the Martinez family, who would finally learn what happened to their grandfather. About the dozens of other families the center had helped, cases solved, questions answered, truths revealed. About the young researchers and investigators who joined their cause, inspired by the idea that history could be corrected, that justice didn't have an expiration date. Sarah joined him at the vault site, her presence comfortable in the gathering dusk. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd taken Castellano's offer that first day? $75,000, a fresh start somewhere else, none of the danger or difficulty that followed. Marcus smiled slightly. Every day for the first year. But not anymore. That money would have run out eventually. The emptiness I was feeling after leaving the army, that wouldn't have been filled by running away to start over somewhere else. This, he gestured at the center, the vault, the work they'd built. This gave me something worth more than money or safety. It gave me a reason to get up in the morning. They stood in companionable silence as stars began to appear overhead. The property that had seemed like a curse, a burden inherited from a stranger, had become the foundation of something meaningful. Not just for Marcus, but for everyone touched by their work. Every family who finally got answers. Every corrupt relationship exposed. Every young person inspired to pursue justice in their own field. Jack had once told Marcus that the measure of a life wasn't in its length or comfort, but in the positive change it created that outlasted the person. Raymond Cole had never seen the vault opened, never knew his research would vindicate his life's work. But his dedication had made everything that followed possible. William Hendricks had died believing the Moretti secrets were lost forever. But his thorough investigation had provided the framework that allowed the truth to eventually emerge. Their legacies weren't in what they personally witnessed or achieved. Their legacies were in the dedication they'd demonstrated, the example they'd set, the foundation they'd built for others to continue. Marcus understood now that his inheritance wasn't the property or the potential fortune in the vault. His inheritance was the responsibility to carry forward their work, to ensure that the fight for truth and justice continued across generations. The center's success had inspired similar efforts in other states. Organizations dedicated to investigating historical injustices, resolving cold cases, exposing corruption that had been buried by time and power. Marcus received calls regularly from people starting their own research centers, seeking advice and guidance. The model they'd developed, combining academic rigor with investigative persistence and victim advocacy, was proving replicable and effective. But success brought new challenges. The more prominent the center became, the more attention it attracted from those who preferred certain truths remain buried. They'd faced legal threats, intimidation attempts, even a suspicious fire in their records building that was ruled arson, though no perpetrator was ever identified. Marcus had learned to operate with constant security awareness, to vary his routines, to maintain the kind of operational security he'd practiced in combat zones. Yet he refused to be deterred. Every threat only reinforced why this work mattered. Powerful interests only tried to silence those who threatened their carefully constructed narratives. The very fact that they faced opposition proved they were making the difference, striking at systems of corruption and cover-up that had operated with impunity for too long. Arthur approached them at the vault site, moving carefully in the dim light. I received word today that the Martinez case has been officially reopened by federal authorities. The evidence from the Moretti ledgers combined with our research was sufficient to justify investigation. Alina may finally learn what happened to her father. Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of progress, of justice moving forward, even when it took decades to do so. That's what we're here for. To make sure time doesn't defeat accountability, that families don't have to carry unanswered questions across generations. The old man looked at the preserved vault entrance, then at Marcus. My father would have liked you. You understand what he understood, that justice isn't about revenge or even punishment primarily. It's about truth. About ensuring that what really happened is acknowledged and recorded, that victims are recognized, that the guilty can't simply outlast consequences. You've built something here that honors his legacy and your uncle's. Something that will outlast all of us. As they walked back toward the center's main building, Marcus reflected on how much his understanding of legacy had evolved. When he'd first inherited this property, he'd thought in terms of what he could extract from it, how it might solve his immediate financial problems. He'd been trapped in the veteran struggle of translating military purpose into civilian meaning, of finding something worth dedicating himself to after years of service. The vault, with its Moretti secrets and decades of hidden truth, had given him that purpose. But more than that, it had taught him that the most valuable inheritances weren't material. Raymond hadn't left him wealth or comfort. He'd left him a mission, a responsibility, a chance to complete work that mattered. And in accepting that inheritance, Marcus had found what he'd been searching for since his discharge. The center hosted a community event that evening, local families gathering for a presentation about historical preservation and justice. Marcus watched young people listening intently as Sarah explained how the Moretti investigation had expanded into multiple states, how seemingly isolated incidents of corruption had been revealed as part of larger patterns. He saw the spark of inspiration in their eyes, the realization that history wasn't fixed but could be corrected, that truth had power even across generations. One teenager raised her hand during the question period. How do you keep going when it seems like powerful people always get away with things? Like the Castellanos are still rich, still influential. Was it even worth it to expose them if they didn't really pay? Marcus fielded that question when he'd wrestled with himself. Justice isn't always immediate or complete. Richard Castellano served time, but not as much as we might have hoped. His family's businesses survived, though damaged. But here's what changed. The truth is now part of the historical record. Students writing papers about organized crime in this region now know the Castellano family's role. Families who suffered because of their actions now have validation, acknowledgement that what happened to them was real and documented. And perhaps most importantly, the example was set that even powerful families with generations of practice hiding their crimes can ultimately be exposed. He paused, looking at the young faces before him. Some fights you win, some you don't, at least not completely. But the fight itself matters. Every time we refuse to accept comfortable lies, every time we insist on truth, even when it's difficult or dangerous, we make it a little harder for corruption to flourish. We create a standard that the next generation can build on. Your generation might finish what we started. That's how progress actually works, not in dramatic victories, but in persistent dedication across time. After the event, as people filtered out into the parking lot, an older woman approached Marcus. She'd been sitting in the back, hadn't participated in the discussion, but had watched intently throughout. Her hands clutched a worn folder as she introduced herself as Margaret Sullivan. "My brother disappeared in 1963, she said quietly. He was investigating illegal dumping by a chemical company. His notes suggested organized crime connections, protection rackets. After he vanished, my family was told to stop asking questions. We were threatened. We stayed silent for 60 years. She looked at Marcus with eyes that held decades of carried grief. But seeing what you've accomplished here, how you've brought truth to light despite the risks, it gave me courage. I want to tell his story now, before it's too late. Before everyone who knew him is gone." Marcus took the folder gently, feeling its weight both literal and symbolic. "We'll help you. That's why we're here. Your brother's story deserves to be told accurately, and if there are people responsible who've never been held accountable, we'll work to change that." As Margaret left, visibly relieved after decades of silence, Sarah touched Marcus's arm. "Do you realize what we've created here? It's not just an investigation center. It's a place where people feel safe finally telling the truth, where the weight of secrets they've carried for lifetimes can finally be set down. That's incredible. Marcus looked around the property one more time before heading inside. The restored gas station, the preserved vault, the new research building, all of it represented something larger than physical structures. They represented the principle that truth mattered, that justice delayed was still worth pursuing, that ordinary people armed with dedication and courage could challenge even the most entrenched corruption. His inheritance, he understood now with perfect clarity, hadn't been a derelict property or buried treasure. It had been an opportunity, a calling, a chance to prove that one person's decision to act could create ripples that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. Raymond had made that choice, spending his final years building a case no one believed in. William Hendricks had made it, prosecuting criminals when doing so put him at risk. Arthur had made it, carrying his father's legacy forward for decades. And now Marcus had made it, transforming a burden into a mission, a lonely gas station into a center for truth and justice. But more than that, he'd helped create a model others could follow. A demonstration that historical accountability was possible, that powerful families couldn't simply outlast consequences if enough people refused to stop seeking truth. The broke veteran who'd arrived 5 years ago with $2,000 and no prospects had found something far more valuable than any Moretti fortune. He'd found purpose in continuing the work of better men who'd come before him. He'd found meaning in helping families like the Martinezes and Margaret Sullivan finally get answers. He'd found community in the team of dedicated researchers and advocates they'd assembled. And he'd found peace in knowing that his life was dedicated to something that mattered, something that would continue long after he was gone. As Marcus locked up the center for the night, he paused at the entrance where a plaque honored Raymond Cole's memory. The inscription read simply, "He refused to let truth stay buried." That refusal, that stubborn dedication to justice regardless of obstacles, had made everything else possible. It was a legacy Marcus was proud to carry forward, and one he hoped to pass on to the next generation of truth seekers. The lights of Ashford glowed in the distance as Marcus drove home, the gas station receding in his rearview mirror, but never far from his thoughts. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new families seeking answers, new opportunities to prove that justice, though sometimes delayed by decades, ultimately prevailed when good people refused to give up. That was the real treasure buried beneath Cole's corner. Not gold or cash or even incriminating ledgers, but proof that dedication and courage could overcome even the most entrenched corruption. That one person's choice to act could change countless lives. And that the fight for truth was always worth having. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.